everyone. Give it up for Keith Mellnick.
All right. When I was about 13 years old, I was sitting on the couch with my father, and he turned to me and he said, you know there's nothing wrong with watching porn with your dad, right? Yeah, anyone I've told this to seems to agree with me and my entire team of therapists that it's not the best influence on an adolescent boy. But it wasn't all that unusual at my dad's place. And just to be clear, it's not like he would bust in on Mr. Belvedere with a VHS cassette in his hand and tell me to dim the lights or anything. It was more that it was something he would watch once in a while when he's hanging out at night, and if my brother or I walked in the room, he didn't want us to feel weird, so he would let us watch it with him. Guess he figured it would kept us off the streets anyway. But at my mom's house, we were being raised good Catholic boys, and the faith was an important part of my identity as a young man. And so when you've got, your sex ed teachers are pornography and the Pope, you get a kid who's really confused, conflicted, and just scared shitless of sex. Enough so that I wasn't sure I was ever gonna lose my virginity, and by the age of 23, that was still the case. And I was moving to Kazakhstan to teach English for a couple years. And I had only been there for a couple of weeks when I fell just head over heels in love with an 18-year-old former Russian gymnast, now law student, named Luba. Her name literally translated as love, and she was beautiful, she was smart, and she was really goofy. I remember one time I walked in on her when she was doing the laundry, and she was animating two socks as puppets, talking to each other when there was nobody else in the room. And I thought that was great. I thought this might be someone really special. And I started, putting the cart in front of the horse and getting ahead of myself and thinking, what am I gonna do if she wants to have sex? Am I cool with that? Am I ready for this? So I went to my two best friends at the time, Paul and Brian. And luckily, Paul and Brian were like the perfect manifestations of the little devil and the little angel on your shoulders in cartoons. And I say, guys, what should I do if Luba is willing to have sex with me? And Paul, in the role of the devil, says, that sounds pretty great, man. You should do it. Which isn't a big surprise. Whether it's losing your virginity or hijacking a school bus, the devil's behind you 110%. But Brian has a similar background to me. He's a calculating Catholic, and he thinks a little bit, and then he says, if you do this, you will no longer be a member in a really exclusive club. And once you leave, there's no way to get back in again. And whatever else anyone may think of that, it's actually a thought that had gone through my head a number of times, that the longer I wait, the more exclusive this aspect is of my personality. But what's different this time is that Paul is there in the role of the devil, and the devil just looks over at the angel and he says, Brian, nobody wants to be in your fucking club. And with that, I was sold. But at that point, the next thing on my mind, I'm raring to go. I want this to happen. But there's two major obstacles, at least, that I can see. Number one is that although Luba and I have been spending a lot of time together, it's only been actually as friends. And I have no idea if she's interested in me romantically, which, contrary to what our current president might think, is really important. Number two is that for some reason I'm convinced that there should be an adult conversation about this before we actually do it. And I've studied Russian for 7 years at this point, but my grammar is terrible. And the only thing I can imagine saying to her is, Luba, I'm thinking you and I should do sex on each other. I'm getting so far ahead of myself. I'm stressing out over it, and eventually, even on that point, I figure it's not like bad dialogue ever kept anyone in a porn movie from having sex, so I'm not gonna worry about it. A couple weeks later, I get what I hope is gonna be my big break, because she invites me to go away for the weekend with a couple of her friends, or like 3 or 4 people, to this little one-room summer house that her family has, a Russian dacha about an hour or 2 outside of town. And so we get there on Friday, and we're drinking vodka, and everybody's laughing, and Luba and I have like this total cat and mouse vibe going, which is really just a nice way of saying I'm pursuing her and she's fleeing. But I keep up that full court press all weekend long because I am so crazy about her. And I want to make sure she knows. She knows I like her, which she knows. But like, I make sure like sit next to her whenever I can, and I touch her hair awkwardly at weird intervals. And by Sunday afternoon, I realized that all I have accomplished at this point is embarrassing myself in front of someone that I really liked. That said, come 10 o'clock at that night, I'm still there. And there's about 3 or 4 of us still hanging out at this summer house. And Luba's friend Dimitri, he's leaning against the wall smoking a cigarette, and he says, "We should go dancing." And a couple of the Russian women, they jump up, they're excited. "Oh, it's such a good idea, let's go dancing." "We never go dancing." And all I can think is, you always go dancing. That's all anyone does in this town. But I'm exhausted, I'm finished, I'm done. And so I say, why don't you guys go ahead? I think I'm just gonna crash out and get some sleep. And so without any protest, they all leave, including Luba. And I watch as Luba walks out the door, and she doesn't even look at me. And so, heartbroken, I sit down on the bed, and I mope, and I beat myself up, and I listen to the car slowly drive away. And then I look up in the doorway, and standing there is Luba. And immediately, I think, I can't believe they forgot her. As if she's like E.T. or Macaulay Culkin or something. But I look in her eyes, and even I realize that she wants to be there, and she walks over to me, and she takes my head in her hands, and not tenderly, but more like it's a soccer ball that's been kicked out of play, and she's got to get it back in the game quickly. And she kisses me passionately, and then she sits down next to me and holds my hand and puts her head on my shoulder and giggles, which then turns into a laugh that goes on for a while, but I'm fine with that because things are going pretty well. And then that night, we fall asleep, entwined, all pretzeled up in each other. And 2 days later, in the back bedroom of her mother's apartment, we do sex on each other. And I recognize it may not be approved of by my church, and it's nothing like in porn movies. For one thing, it is a lot briefer. It's really a lot closer to an animated GIF than a movie, actually. But still, despite that, despite everything, somehow, despite this lifetime of accumulating anxieties over this, it's perfect. Thank you.